I grew up in a small Acadian village here in Cape Breton, in Lewisdale. I belong to a very devout Catholic family. I started going to church regularly, I guess, probably when I was about 5 or 6 years old. My grandmother used to, if she could find me on her way to the glebe house, to the evening mass, she would drag me with her. I guess we had a parish priest at that time who later went on to become Bishop Fougere, actually, and I thought he was magic. I thought he was magical. He was an amazing man, and he made it all like magic to me, and it was something I felt like I was a part of, especially because it was something that was so important to my grandparents, and they were the mesh that kept our family together.
Now, at some point, the man who went on to become bishop left, and it's another priest that we're talking about where your trouble started, right?
Yeah. I think it would have been around the time of my first communion that Father Fougere left. And James Mumbriquette became our parish priest. And he was the man who sexually assaulted me repeatedly.
You were an altar boy?
I was an altar boy. I couldn't wait to be an altar boy. It was, it was something that I think just about every young boy in our community aspired to be. And the priest was, he was right up there with God. What he said, what he did was right. And that's what we knew.
How old were you when the abuse started?
I believe I would have been 8 years old. To my best recollection, I would have been 8. I remember the first time it happened. I remember the evening, like it was yesterday. It was in the fall. I remember walking home. And I don't think I've been the same since. I don't really remember even the sound of his voice. I remember how he smelled. I remember how his beard felt. He had a very rough face. And I remember his eyes. He assaulted me in school, in the bathroom of the elementary school, during school. Most of the time, though, it was in the church, in the back of the church. There was always a reason to stay, things that needed to be done.
Did you ever tell anyone what was happening?
Not at the time. I guess I felt like I was damned if I did, and I was damned if I didn't, because I didn't think anyone would believe me, other than my grandparents. And I think that was why I couldn't tell them, because I knew they would. And I didn't want them to know.
Why?
I felt dirty. I felt like it was my fault. Why me? Why else would it have been me?
So you carried around this secret for a number of years. What happened after Father Mumbriquette left Lewisdale and you grew up? Well,
I began very early experimenting with alcohol and drugs. I was 12 or 13 years old, and I discovered really quickly that as soon as I had either a drink or anything, it didn't seem to matter much. And I became very good at covering and acting as if everything was okay. I left Lewisdale as soon as I could. I found myself in Yellowknife at a very, very young age, with a lot of freedom and money and, no restraint and no common sense. And I ended up getting myself into a lot of trouble in a lot of different ways. I was in trouble with the law. I became a daily cocaine user. I was drinking more than one man should. From one day to the next, I didn't know where I would sleep. I used people. I let people use me. And I don't know how. I don't know how I managed to live through it, because, to be honest, most of the time I didn't care if I did or not. So I've been divorced twice. I have had more jobs than I could even begin to count. I've lived in just about every major city in Western Canada and several small ones, quite a few little towns, villages. I'd only stay in one place as long as I could keep it together. And as soon as my world would fall apart, as it always did, I'd just move on. I knew in my heart that if anybody really knew me, they certainly wouldn't want to have anything to do with me.
How did you end up becoming a part of this class action settlement with the diocese?
Well, about 10 years ago, I spoke to someone about this. It was the first time, and it was probably the first time I had felt safe with anyone, probably since the abuse. And surprisingly enough, he was a minister. And I told him, and I told my ex-wife, and I told my family, and I didn't really tell anybody else. It wasn't something that I was capable of talking about. And when I did talk about it, it was in very vague, very, very loose terms. And it wasn't until actually I came here to Sydney that I did actually find a therapist that I did feel safe with. And I told her, I started speaking with her about it. And around that same time, my fiance and I were in my shop. At the time, I owned my own business. And we were just sitting there. She was sitting at the computer, and she just happened to type in James Mumbercat on the computer, and up popped APM Lawyers. And it was a contact number for, it said, if you were a victim of Father James Mumbercat, call this number. And while my fiance was reading the rest of it, I called the number, and I spoke to John McKeegan. And in 5 minutes on the phone, he changed my life forever.
How? Because
I knew in that 5 minutes that I was worth fighting for. Because he was a stranger. He didn't know me from a hole in the ground. And I told him the worst secret that I had. And he was angry. And I thought, wow, I never felt that before. I never felt like somebody would stand up and fight for me. He also informed me during that phone call that the only way that he would have anything to do with having me on the lawsuit was if I was well, if I could handle it. He wanted to make sure I was in therapy regularly, that I had a strong support system, and that I would be okay. And that just let me, he cared about me, even though he knew, what had happened to me. And that, for me, was the beginning. It was the beginning. I began the therapy, and we're going on 4 years. And I hate almost every second of it, because it's painful, and it's scary, and I have to let myself feel and see the things that I spent my whole life trying to not see and think. So I had to basically retrain my brain and not listen to that manipulator in my head, because that was the one that was telling me that I was no good and that I would always fail, and to keep everything in the shadows.
And at the same time that you were going through all this in therapy, the diocese accepted the settlement. I mean, the two
Yes.
sides came to terms.
Absolutely.
What has that done for you?
That was when I won. When that ended and the diocese said publicly, yes, this happened. Yes, it was wrong. And yes, we're sorry. And we'll do what we can. That's all I wanted. I didn't think we were ever going to get that. I never thought in a million years that we would ever win. And actually, the last time I spoke to Mr. McKeegan, I told him that, and he was a little put off because I said, thanks for having a lot of faith. But I don't think he thought he was going to win either. It's a big fight, and I can't imagine the amount of work that went into what they did. It's painful to go there. It's hard. There's a lot of loss, a lot of pain. But then I have to think about the literally thousands of people who have been affected by what happened to me, just by their contact with me. I have to tell you that over the last 25 years, being in contact with Bobby Bowden was not usually a positive thing. I was not a guy you wanted to have around.
And now?
Well, I like to think that I know it sounds cliche, but I think I know who I am. I've been working in the same place for 2.5 years. I have friends. I have a fiancé. I have all the things that I never thought I would have.
How much money are you going to get from the settlement?
Well, actually, that's yet to be determined. I still don't know the exact amount. I haven't asked a whole lot of questions about it. This wasn't about money for me. I never cared about money. My whole life, I never cared about money. There's not an amount that will ever make this go away. I will live with this for the rest of my life, money or not.
What about your relationship with the church now?
My relationship with the church right now is, well, actually, I don't have one. I was actually baptized in the United Church a few years ago. However, I almost feel like I want badly to take back what was taken from me. And part of that, as well as my childhood, was my faith, my belief in the Catholic Church and all that comes with that, the dogma, the ceremony, everything. My grandparents, who I started out wanting to be like, wouldn't have given this up without a fight. They wouldn't have walked away. I think it's time for me to get over myself and move on to something bigger. And I think that my faith is the bigger thing.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks again.